Well, as a content creator who doesn't have the early access to try out the lighter, but you know what? I can have lighter to come to my place to try out my food at Cheesetopia. That's a pretty pathetic way to cope. Anyway, this is lighter pool analysis, and I'm sad that I couldn't play him for now. And be sure to like and sub so I don't have to complain about it on the Reddit. But hey, I can just watch other content creators' videos and make a summary over here. And the first thing that I notice about Lighter is that he is more of a buffer than a stunner because of his passive. And most of his kit are revolving around buffing the ice and fire element in terms of attacks. And even his W engine is also revolved around buffing the fire and ice element, which increase up to 30% critical damage on ice and fire element. All I can say is it's probably perfect for Bernice because she could utilize the crit by one of her ability, and also for Soldier 11 and any other ice characters that could proc the critical damage, I guess. So basically he's a quick swap stunner that, unlike any other stunner, that he rely other teammates to attacks and performing on field in order to charge up his morale to perform his burst attack, which cause a loss of days to the enemy. So the fundamental difference between Lighter and other stunner is that you can't just only have Lighter out to hit the enemy until they are stunned like other stun unit. You need to have other unit to attack the enemy in order to enable Lighter to daze the enemy, and that somehow makes him a unique stunner and a very restrictive quick swapping stunner. But he's a perfect stunner for anomaly team, which I'm gonna explain about it later. And if we talks about his stunning capability, he could stun the enemy really fast because he could buff the impacts by himself, but he's a lackluster on the damage multiplier. Unlike Lycan and Xingyi, both of them has huge amounts of damage multiplier, and his swap timing is not as flexible as Koleida, making his break capability in itself not so interesting. Aside from this one, he extends 3 seconds of stunning time, which I believe that the breaks usually last about 14 to 15 seconds on the boss, which is not a whole lot when compared to Qingyi's breaks multiplier, but it does provide some levels of safety because he could stun the enemy relatively fast because one of his kit is literally increase his impact, but on top of that, the amounts of impact will also affect the amounts of the damage buff you get, which is capped at 270 impact, and you couldn't reach that threshold without his signature weapon, making his signature weapon comparable to the Caesar's signature weapon, which both of them give absurd amounts of buff. So if we take a step back, he's definitely an upgrade to the Lycan in the Elenjo team, and also an upgrade to the Koleida, but his kit is definitely more of a buffer and more defensive because he could extend 3 seconds of breaks, with the downside of you couldn't solo stun the enemy like what any other stunner could do, and that is inevitably forcing your DPS to hit the target without the stun multiplier, indirectly losing the damage. So I think I could say it comfortably that Lighter is the stunner that is trailer made for this anomaly team, because anomaly DPS doesn't need to care about whether enemy is stunned or not. The majority sources of damage are coming from triggering the anomaly and not by the DPS itself. So there has been this problem when you try to pair the anomaly team or the disorder team with a stunner. It's gonna have a really weird rotation and it's not even effective. You might as well wanna switch Qingyi into Caesar or even Lucy, because those characters would just straight up buff you right away. So let me show you what am I talking about. So if I wanna be able to utilize Qingyi's breaks multiplier, so I have to let the Yanagi and Bernice out first to preemptively build up some anomaly to set up the disorder. And as you can see, I'm trying to break it here, and I'm trying to get a disorder out of this. So that's 1 disorder, 2 disorder. And the thing with this type of rotation is that even though it gives a lot of damage when the enemy is break, I also lose a lot of damage when I pre-build the anomaly to set up for the disorder with the stun to be able to get the most multiplier from Qingyi. But Lighter kind of fixed all of that because I can just keep hitting the enemy without worrying about the rotation. And let's pretend Anbi is lighter. So right here, I would just have Yanagi to do the normal attacks to charge up the morale of Lighter. And once Lighter charge up the morale, I would just have Lighter to deal all his burst damage and the daze, and switch back to Bernice when his morale is depleted without worry all the setup and the stun like it was with the Jingyi team or any other stunner team. And in between that rotation, the enemy is going to breaks without any complicated setup. I think that's the perks of using Lighter in an anomaly team. And this is the reason why Lighter is so strong in the anomaly team, because he would provide all the utility without disturbing the anomaly rotation. The thing I want to talk about with stunner is that there hasn't been a stunner that is dedicated for anomaly team, because one of the biggest weakness of an anomaly teams is that you don't get to break the enemy often, and that put your on-field characters in danger of dodging the enemy, making it less comfortable to play without defensive unit like Caesar. And yes, I think he's more like a Caesar than any other stunner. While Caesar gives the defensive capability from shield, Lighter gives defense capability from extended stun. And that is one of the major reasons why I say that he's an endgame character, because you don't really need him if you were trying to S-rank the critical node. But if you're like speed running the critical node, or if you're challenging yourself in the endless tower, well, Lighter would probably provide better defensive capability as much as Caesar, if not better, for how fast he can stun the enemy. And obviously he's going to be really good for Soldier 11 and Alan Joe, but definitely not as good as when he's paired with the other anomaly characters like Bernice and the Miyabi, who is going to be anomaly characters and the ice characters back in CBT. So do you want to pull for Lighter? In general, I wouldn't recommend you to pull for Lighter, because you could clear the critical node with other limited S-rank DPS anyway, and Lighter is very restrictive support. He's only good for ice and fire element. He's not the types of characters that you could just slot him into any team, like Caesar or even Lucy, which those two are very flexible characters that could be slot in pretty much any team. And I do think Lighter has a lot of alternative, like Lycan Koleda or even Nico Sukaku could fill his role. So that's why I don't recommend Lighter for general use, because he's not a flexible character. You need to have the plan to pull for Miyabi, which is an anomaly characters, or you already have a Bernice or Soldier 11 or Alan Joe for him to work. So in terms of team building, he's also very restrictive, but he's definitely a huge power increase to the ice and fire team. And if you're talking about the endgame content, you're trying to min-max everything, doing the speed run or the endless tower, is definitely one of the best characters to push through the power level ceiling to get yourself a better time on speed running and giving you a lot of safety in the endless tower, where he could stun the enemy over and over if you don't have a Caesar. And that's about it. See ya guys, and make sure to like and sub.